So today we get to talk about a brand new plant family. Last time or last week, we spoke about the sunflower family and all the plants that are going to be important to people for the oils, for the food, as well as for animals and the ornamental ones. Today we get to talk about a family that is going to be primarily succulent or have a succulent stem. And just to define what a succulent plant is, succulent plant is going to be any plant that has adapted for growing in very dry climate or growing where there might not be a lot of water. And so they have evolved over time the ability to store water in a stem or in the leaves or sometimes in the root. And so the stems, the leaves, and the root may have acquired a fleshy kind of shape or form, and that's going to be so that the plant can store the water because it's only going to be able to store it when it rains, and it needs to hold enough water for it to sustain it for the rest of the year until new rain happens to come by. And so we get to talk more about this great plant family that is also well represented in California or the California floristic province. And so once again, I keep reminding you, please know the flower parts because as we have seen with the sunflowers, there have been some modifications, and the same thing is going to be true for the plants that we're going to talk about today. So here's just another generic drawing of a flower. And so we're going to get talk about the Crassulaceae or the stonecrop family as a common name for that. And it's going to be just 34 genera. This will be a small family. We're not going to see most of them because they're not going to be in cultivation or they might be in the wild and maybe found in a few collections here and there, but that's about it. And about 1,300 plus species native to a lot of the temperate and or some of the drier areas. There's a few represented in South America, and we can see that California is going to be well represented by members of this family. Here's just a representative individual. Here is Crassula, has become very popular. This selection has become very popular because the leaves have now taken the shape of Shrek's ears or ogre's ears, as it is now the common name. Prior to the movie Shrek, it was just another plain succulent plant growing in everybody else's garden. And when we talk about succulents, plants or succulents, be aware that there's going to be many plant families and other plant groups that are not related that have also evolved the same mechanism for storing water. And over time, they may have taken similar appearance because they have evolved in probably a similar climate in different parts of the world. So on the top image, we have a representative for our family that is a Dudleya. And on the bottom left, we have a type of Asteraceae, so a senecio that looks very similar, very narrow, silver color, kind of whitish color, and kind of finger-like leaves, very, very fleshy. And in the middle, we have Isoaceae, which is the ice plant family. And the ice plant is going to have is going to be well represented in Africa and in the Middle East. And there's going to be some succulent plants in that as well. And the Xanthoraceae, which is the aloe family, there's going to be a few representatives out of that, including aloes as well. And a few others. So we have Opuntias, which are going to be the cacti. And then even the cissus, which is going to be in the Vitaceae or the grape family. And at the bottom, we have the Calendrinia after Calendriniaceae. which is going to be the purslane family, or Portulaceae, not Calendrinaceae, Portulaceae. So the purslane. So they will have some succulents as well. So it is succulent, storing water, having fleshy stem is going to be found with many plants. When we look at our stonecrop family, we're going to find that the plants are going to produce a flower cluster that's going to kind of look as if it's crying or wilting towards the tip as the flowers are maturing and as the flowers are going to open. When they open, is going to be a multitude of tiny flowers or blossoms because they share the same flower stalk. And when we look closely at them, there's going to be a few characteristics that are going to be different from the generic drawing that we saw in the beginning. So for example, we are going to have 4 to 5 carpels. The drawing only has one. So these are 4 or 5 separate carpels, each one having their own stigma, each one having their own style. And you can see a clear separation among the different ones. And then the carpels are going to be alternating with 4 to 5 or several stamens. Here's 4 or 5. And a few of them, there's going to be a lot more. And there's also going to be 4 to 5 petals. The flowers may look like a star, or sometimes the petals and the sepals may be partly fused, creating a trumpet or some kind of trumpet shape to it. But here is just a simple standard flower for a member of this family. And so here is on the left, we have sedum, which is going to be a very common and popular ground cover. And on the right, we have another individual that has those trumpet-shaped flowers. So the flowers are going to be a lot more ornate, and they're going to be very showy, and they're going to be a little bit larger. And so here are the two basic flower shape. Sometimes the one on the left is going to be known as a dish-like because they are going to be facing towards the sun. And the one on the right is going to be bell-shaped because it has a similar appearance, and it's going to be facing towards the ground. You see the fusion of the petals and the sepals to create some kind of floral tube that's going to be a little bit long. And if we look inside, we have exactly the same thing. We have the alternating stamens to the petals. And then we have here exactly the same. And we can even see that there might be some fusion of the petals with the stamens, but they are alternating with each of the carpels. And if we were to cut those flowers so that we can see the inside, we're going to see exactly the same thing, except obviously because the flower is going to have a much longer floral tube or in a bell shape. Now the style is going to be much longer. And then we have the stamens, and then we have the sepals and the rest of the flower parts. And when we separate the flower components, we can see exactly that. We see the sepals that I have moved out of the way on the left, kind of papery. And then obviously at the bottom of the style, there's going to be the carpel. The compartment that will have the ovule, that will eventually have, excuse me, the seeds. The seeds that will later on germinate and become a brand new plant. So we have all the flower parts right there. And so we have a simple disc-like flower on top and a separated bell-shaped flower on the bottom. And so pollination is going to be very simple for the disc-shaped flowers. They are going to be produced in a very large cluster that will have pollen. And so any potential insect that wants a meal is welcome to step on the flowers. And in the process of visiting the flowers and drinking the nectar, it will be inevitable that the insect may be bathe with pollen, and as it moves around from flower to flower and plant to plant, it's going to bring about pollination. So we have different types of bees, bumblebees, as well as butterflies that will visit the flowers. And on some of the ones that might be bell-shaped, where there is no landing platform, the hummingbird or the bird may be the natural pollinator. So the genus Dudleya is very well represented here in California, and the genus Dudleya is pollinated primarily by hummingbird. And I was able to take this photograph at a distance, and you can see the hummingbird right here as it is feeding on the nectar that is found within the Dahlia flowers. So Dahlias are primarily pollinated by hummingbird. For the plants that come from Africa, their main pollinator is going to be a sugar bird. And the sugar birds, unlike the hummingbirds, do not hover. They're much, much bigger. And so it is very common for the individuals that come from Africa to have a very stout perch. So a very strong stem where the bird, as an example here with this aloe, is going to land, is going to perch on the stem. And if you notice, the flowers are facing towards the bottom so that the bird will have no difficulty in reaching the nectar. And the flowers and the plant wants the birds to reach the nectar because that's how they can bathe the beak or the face with the pollen, and that is how pollination is achieved. And so that's why there is a very stout, very thick landing platform or landing stem for the birds or the larger birds. The fruit for Dahlias is going to be a follicle that will open once the seeds mature. So there are very little to no real value as far as food. The flower stalks are edible. Some people eat them, but otherwise, there are no real uses as far as food, or at least not extensive food. We do not rely on this plant for any caloric value for by people. So the fruit is going to be dry when it matures. It's just going to open up, release the seeds, and so it's going to be a follicle. And just to help us along with separating the individuals, we have two main subfamily. So we have the Crassulaceae, or the Crassula would be this type specimen for this subfamily. We have the Kalanchoe, which is going to be the Kalanchoe for the type specimen. And then we have the Sempervivoides, which is Sempervivum. Is going to be the type specimen for this. So we're going to go over the three subfamilies, starting with the Crassulaceae. And the Crassula, or jade plant, as it is commonly known, is going to be a plant that everybody's going to have. It's a very nice plant if somebody does not want to deal with care, culture, and or watering a plant. So it has its value and place in many landscapes. We see it here being used on a parkway, and we see the white flowers, and we also see a couple of copper color flowers that are now past their blooming period and they have now faded. We see a close-up of the flowers showing you the different reproductive structures. And one of the nicer and more elegant Crassula is going to be Crassula coccinea, or the scarlet red. It's available through a few selected nurseries, and I think Armstrong sold it at one point or another, but I have seen it only once. Otherwise, you may have to look around for it. It is a very, very beautiful when it's in bloom. Outside of bloom, it just looks like another succulent plant that is definitely going to be nice, but its real beauty will come when the flower plant decides to flower. Then you will be admiring a lot of those gold scarlet red flowers. A few others that have very small leaf and or very small flower will be our Crassula muscosa, sometimes known as the coral plant, because it kind of resembles the coral that you would find in the ocean. Here is the spent flowers and the very, very tiny leaves. So it's just more of an architectural type plant. Or Crassula perforiata. Here is the leaves, perfoliata, because the leaves are going to be partly clasping along the stem or the stem of the plant. And here's when it's in flower. So you can see the petals are white, and there's going to be a little bit of a floral too, but not as long as the red ones. And here's a different form, kind of dwarf, that has been available through some of the nurseries in full flower. And there's a close-up of the flowers, as well as an even closer of this. And then Crassula falcata, the propeller plant. Here we have the leaves, and I also want to bring up the fact that a lot of these plants are going to be kind of silvery white, and that's going to be another mechanism for surviving the heat and the dryness. So the white color, the light color on the foliage is going to reflect the heat, which is going to allow the plant to survive the sunlight or the intense sunlight. It's exactly the same mechanism as when a person wears a white shirt that reflects the sunlight and reflects the heat. And so this silver kind of glaucous, bluish, whitish color on the plant is going to be a survival mechanism or a mechanism for surviving the sun or the heat from the sun. And when it's in bloom, it's going to be a very nice wow factor. So scarlet red flowers, and there's the cluster of flowers on this plant. And then Crassula cornata. This is known as pygmy weed. This is a California native plant, and this is an annual plant. So yes, there are annual succulents here or in the world, including Crassula cornata. And it always amazes me when I've gone to seminars and I've gone to trips, and people talk about protecting California native plants. And as they are talking, they are trampling over this plant. It's all over their feet, but because it's so small, they don't realize that it's even there or realize that it's a California native plant underneath their feet right now, and they destroy it, which is sad because it is a very nice, very cutesy little plant. It usually comes up by itself in the spring after a good rain, and it just covers the ground, lives its life for the spring, summer. And then when it gets really hot, it just then dies. And by that time, it has already released the seeds and continues a new generation. And here it is growing in the wild in Griffith Park. So we see all this red on the ground. That is all Crassula cornata. And on this hiking trail, it is all over the place. Very, very abundant. And here it is where it just mixed with a few other individuals just coming out of the gravel. And it does have the fruit right here, and the flowers are also going to be very small, but it's a very tiny, very small, very cutesy succulent that we are lucky, fortunate to have it here as a native plant in California. And here is in Peru. So we came across, as you saw, there was some representatives in South America. So here is in Peru, and you can see it just growing out of the rock. Obviously, in a rock, when it rains, the rock is not going to hold the humidity, so the plant will still be able to absorb the water and hold it. So not that one, that is actually oxalis, but there's going to be many throughout right here. And if we look a little bit closer, you can see the tiny succulents embedded with throughout this, just in small grooves, mixed with oxalis, mixed with tillandsias, and you see another one over here. And a little bit closer, just in a tiny groove or tiny pocket of the rock, the seed has managed to germinate, and you see the nice succulent right there. And here it is with the leaves and the very tiny flowers. So most likely another Crassula, and this one happens to be native to Peru. And here it is, You would never think about tillandsias growing alongside Crassulaceae or succulents, but in fact they do in the wild, and they do complement each other. And then if we look at the subfamily Kalanchoides, representative is going to be Kalanchoe, this one known as paddle plant or flapjack. Many of them are going to be what is known as monocarpic, uh, which means that the plant is going to be happy and living for several years. But the moment that it decides to flower, the plant or that rosette that decides to flower is then going to die. It will be replaced by other rosettes or other growing shoots from the base, but that one rosette that's going to stretch and flower is going to die soon after it has finished its blooming cycle. And so here we have the flowers for this flapjack plant. And here's the close-up of them. And here they are when they are just getting ready to begin the flowering cycle. So they kind of look a little bit reddish. They look very, very nice, very architectural. And here's the close-up of those. And the beginning of the blooming. So they're going to stretch from the center, giving rise to that flower stalk. And here's where a few of them have already started flowering, as well as developing the flowers. So a combination of all of them. And very common around here is going to be the Kalanchoe blasfoldiana. Uh, Very common for the flowers, very common as a gift. It's found in the florist shop, it's found at the garden center. It is being used by people for many, many reasons. It's a great plant. There's going to be some that will have a simple flower, many, many colors, or some that have been selected for having multi-petal, and the flowers may resemble small roses. And here's a couple of other colors that I came across. And then we have this other Kalanchoe with the red flowers that I shown before, that it is also very common to see out in the landscape because people have moved to having more of a water conservation or water-wise garden. So they having to find places or small niches areas where some of these plants may be incorporated into the general landscape of the plant. And one of the biggest ones that you're going to find is going to be Kalanchoe bahariensis. This one is native to Madagascar. And here it is growing, and it's going to be a small tree or a very large shrub. It's going to develop somewhat of a woody stem, but not really woody for that matter. It's still going to have somewhat of a succulent feel to it. Here's a very large leaf that will definitely store water. And here it is when it's getting ready to flower or when it's flowering. And the flowers are going to be there. They're kind of have the same color as the rest of the plant. So it's going to require for you to stop by and pay attention to be able to notice them. But they are very nice. This is not a monocarpic, so it will flower and then it'll flower again next year. And then Kalanchoe carnea, this one is another that is very common, often prized for being a very good succulent for growing in the shade. Yes, there are going to be many succulent plants that will prefer a place in the garden where they're going to be protected from the sun. In nature, that's where they grow, underneath the canopy of the tree, underneath maybe in between rocks in a canyon. And so, although they are succulents, be aware that many of them will look much, much better, or they will prefer to be in a protected environment if you were to use it in the landscape. And that is the case of the Kalanchoe carnea, which I was able to find this individual when it was flowering. And you see very nice, colorful pink flowers. And there's a close-up of that. And then Kalanchoe Gastoni, this is known as donkey ears, also from Madagascar. And this one is known for having vivipary. And vivipary is going to be something that you're going to find in a few selected plants. It's where the plant can give live birth to a different individual. And so many Kalanchoes, not just this individual, is going to be known for having baby plants grow out of the leaf. And so you have different nodes throughout the plant. At a certain point in the life, a baby plant is going to emerge. And so what happened in a selected area of the leaf, there will be a cell that will revert into an embryo. It's going to revert into an embryo, multiply, and then develop the growing shoot and the roots. And so you're going to have a completely formed plant. And that's what's going to happen. And that can happen throughout the leaf, giving rise to many, many baby plants. The product of vivipary are going to be genetic clones to the parent. And so this is just a survival mechanism. They may come from areas where the environment may be very harsh. And if the flower plant happens to flower, then it's going to die. But by creating clones of itself, the baby plants that are already germinated, and all they need to do is land in some substrate and root to the ground, then the plant will have another chance in the future of setting flowers and hopefully produce seeds that will eventually find a niche in the environment and be able to give rise to another plant to continue on with the species. And so here's where a leaf was just lay on top of a bench, and you can see the baby plants that are produced. There's different stages as well as the other photograph. And here is Aeonium. And this one will have that vivipary or the baby plants that will come right out of the flower stalk. So once again, the plant is going to be monocarpic, so that rosette will flower and then it's going to die. It may produce some seeds, or it may also produce baby plants out of the flower stalk. And so it's very easy to multiply them, put them in a container, put them in the ground, and continue on having more plants out of this. And so here's a fully formed baby plant, and you see the fruit, and you see where it came out of the flower stalk. And we also have that mother of thousands, which is a different calico that is known for having thousands of babies. And yes, once you get one of this, you're going to have it the rest of your life because the babies are just going to drop. And if they find some substrate, they will grow and they will continue on making more babies soon after that. So be very careful because they could become invasive or can grow in areas where you might not want them. And here's where there's a good population with flowers, and maybe baby plants will come later on. And there's the stock for this individual. And the close-up of that showing you a very beautiful flower. And here it is also in the wild. Now, this is in the wild. It is in the wild, but it may have been an escape. This is in Chiapas, where we happen to come across one of this or several of them. So hopefully it's not an invasive species. I have yet to find out what the species is to determine if it's in fact belongs to that area or somebody let it go from the garden. And then here's one that became very popular when the new Getty opened because they used it in the landscape. And after it, people saw it, everybody wanted it. And then inevitably the nurseries had to grow it. This is the chalk Crassula, and there's the flowers and the leaves. And here's a better close-up of the flowers. And then the genus Catleden, often available. Here's an image from a garden center around here, Home Depot. And so here is a mix with a few other Crassulas, Aeonium, and it's all showing you some really nice forms and shapes. And the flowers, bell shape for this individual, and looking up at them. And then in the last subfamily, Semper Vivodium, Vivoidi, Semper Vivodi. we have the sedum, and represented by our donkey's ears, not donkey's ears, donkey tail. So Sedum organianum, very popular. Here it is being used in containers. And when it gets to a good size, you will see a flower. Often people may not notice it because they're going to be hidden, or often people might not let it grow long enough for it to flower and be able to admire it by the people. But here's a flower. It will be very nice. And here's where it's been used. Several of these members of this family has been used in a moss basket, just as a hanging ornamental container. And there's the flowers for this individual and the close-up of that. Or the sedum, which is used as a ground cover. There's going to be lots of choices out there. Some of them are going to have golden yellow leaves. Others are going to have more of a variegation, maybe a pinkish color or a stripe. And all of them will at some point give out a very nice kind of small flower, but you will be able to see it when it's above the foliage and it's being shown by the plant. And so here's some more flowers of other sedums that are out there, and just a close up of those. And the kind of the moss sedum here with the golden star-like flowers. Just a nice clumping individual showing you the leaves and the flowers. Or the graptopetalum. Here, another very popular because people just break the stem, put it in the ground, water it once, and that's it. So yes, for people who claim that they have brown thumbs, they have taken refuge with the cactus and or succulent plants, mainly the succulents, because it's very easy for them to feel good that they have finally managed to find a plant that they cannot kill. And that's because they just shove it in the ground or shove it in a pot, and it will root. And it will sometimes root when it's hanging from the plant. So it's nothing new. And so here's the flowers for this yellow one. And so here's very nice in a demonstration garden, kind of cascading over rock or growing over rock. And it's showing some of the beautiful flowers and the leaves and the rosettes. So the rosettes that are formed by the overlapping of the leaves from the plants. And then Aeoniums that we have here, they're going to be native to a lot of the Canary Islands and or um, some of the other islands or Africa. It's going to be very popular. Once again, this one has also gotten a lot more popularity as people keep looking for other cactus or succulent plants for their landscape. It can get quite big. Usually in the fall is when it likes to flower around here. It's going to be the dark purple brown or almost black color on the leaf that we have, or kind of reddish. Very nice, very beautiful. And so here's just a few of those Aeoniums with different flower colors and different foliage color as well. And the close-up of the flowers that we have here, golden yellow. And this is one that has the multi-stamens, so more than 4 or 5, up to 11 stamens. And some of them are going to be also prized for either having a variegation, some kind of off color from the green. In this case, it's going to be yellow. Or a lot of people are going to like them because they're going to look like flowers. So we know that flowers are going to be something that is going to be of high price for a plant. And so when the plant has already all the leaf in its body that resembles a flower, then people can enjoy a flower-like structure throughout the entire months of the year, whereas flowers will have its blooming cycle and then they're going to go away. And so that's why a lot of people like them, because it to them it feels that they have flowers every single month out of the year. And here's just a previous student of mine, just for scale, with some of the larger Aeoniums that we encounter on Naples Island here. And then a few other generic weird individuals. Monanthes, and this is more of a collector's item. I was able to photograph this individual when I happened to see it. And there's the flower, the close-up of the flowers and the stem. Many of them, again, just in cultivation because there's going to be some succulent collectors that are going to go bonkers for them and they're just going to keep them alive. And then out of Mexico or in Mexico, around Mexico or in the country of Mexico, we have the genus Echeveria, and it's going to find niches throughout the area along the mountains, streams, and everywhere else. Here we have the flower stalk with the flowers. The flowers are also going to be very nice. And here we have some just grotesque echeverias. So once again, the market has demanded for different ones to be available. And so this one has warts and grotesque patterns on the leaves that makes it interesting and makes it a prize plant that everybody wants. Here they are being used as a border plant in a nice garden. And then here we have Echeveria agavoides. We'll get to see this one later on, but we see a very nice display of leaves that have a nice margin of red, and also the baby plants that will come out of the plant, or sometimes from below. And then here we have a different Echeveria mixed with Graptopetalum. And so here's the ornate one with just some wrinkling on the margin of the leaf, and or a different one that we saw on Naples, the commonly known as hen and chicks because there's the baby plants that come out of the bottom. And there's the flowers for this individual, and there's the close-up of that. And a different one with some pinkish leaves with the petal plant in the back and a few other succulents and the flowers and the face flowers. And then in California, we have Dudleyas. And as you venture from north to south, California, there's going to be different species of Dudleyas. Not too long ago, there was articles about Dudleya poachers. So unfortunately, the Dudleyas have been targeted by many collectors, mainly in Europe and Asia. And just like we seek out plants from other parts of the world to bring them into California and add them to our collections, the people from other parts of the world are doing the same thing. So succulents like this are going to be prized as a collector's item. And people are going to go to national parks or areas where there's going to be dahlias growing, and they're going to harvest them from the wild, and they are going to offer them to the collectors for a price. Here's the flowers for this dahlia that is growing in Griffith Park, and the dahlias have also now gotten into the general landscape. So it is now a lot more common to see dahlias used in the landscape, as in the case here, where they have been planted with other succulents and other drought-tolerant plants. And there's the dahlia, and including some of the flowers. And then as you venture south, you can find a few other species, including this one. And I want to make a note about how they grow. So notice how they grow facing towards the side. They just grow on the side of the cliff. And that is very important because if you happen to buy a Dudleya or you're going to use them in the landscape, make sure that you put them or plant them at an angle. They don't like to be flat or facing straight up. So always notice or pay attention or be aware of what is the natural growing pattern of those plants. And you should try to mimic that when you are going to be planting them in the landscape. So here they are mixed with barrel cactus. Once again, they are not facing up, they're facing towards the side. And here's where another landscape here in Long Beach, cactus, succulent, different types of weird plants, and including some of the Dudleyas that we see right here, and a few more right here. And Catalina Island will also have its own endemic Dudleya. I think this is Dudleya Hussey, just out of Avalon. If you just step away from the ferry, just look up the mountain and look by the rocks, and you will see Dudleyas growing all over nooks and crannies and just exposed to the environment. And that's where some of these photographs came from. And just right on top of the rock, some seed managed to find enough soil to germinate and grow and give rise to this beautiful, happy plant. And so that's all they really need. And there's a close up. And so just look in the hills and the mountains if you go to Catalina, and you cannot miss them because they are all over the place, because that is where they are native to, or at least this individual is native to. So I believe there are three native species, and dahlias or succulents with ferns. Yeah, even though they're succulents, even though their people may consider them drought tolerant, during the time, the right time of the year, they may have the company of ferns when the ferns are also actively growing. And so here are different dahlias for different in Carolina as well as in Mexico, where they just happen to find that nice niche with a little bit of soil just to get a grip. And the dahlia mixed with Mammillaria in the wild here. Yes. And in San Quintin, there is going to be a different species known as Dudleya antoni. This is going to be a very large one. It prefers to grow in the volcanic rocks. And San Quintin has some old dead volcanoes, and you find a lot of that lava rock. And so here it is when we happen to visit an island off of the coast of San Quintin, and you see them right growing out of the rock. And once again, on the side, here's some very large specimen, definitely very old. And some of the old volcanoes. This is Anthony is the only place where you find it, so it doesn't venture too far away from San Quintin, and you can see it all over the side of the volcano, and just part of the native vegetation, just growing on top of this lava rock with very little soil, mixed with other native plants like Encelias and uh, sagebrush and everything else. And so here it is, and a lot of lichen, very nice for air quality. So lichen is also very happy and very healthy. And here's a mixture of agave shawi, which is also native to coastal California. Does not make it into northern border, but it's still coastal California. Some cacti and some dahlias, and you can see the same pattern going across in the landscape in the wild. And this is Punta Colonet, also in Baja California, just about an hour and a half south from uh, Ensenada. And if you make it to the tip, it's a small peninsula. It's beautiful, and it's the ground is covered with Dudleya. Now, what I want to point out here is that you can see a mist. So California is known for having May haze and June glooms. So before the onset of summer, and even during the summer, it is very common for certain months to have a nice mist in the morning. That extra mist is vital for giving some of these plants that extra drink of water that will keep them alive, and hopefully it'll give them water to store for the few months when the temperature is going to be very hot and very dry. So it is known that having those misty or those hazy days where there's going to be some accumulation of moisture dropping to the ground, maybe picked up by the plants through the leaves and then channeled into the roots, is going to be very, very vital for the survival of these plants here in the coastal areas where it may get very dry in the summer. Here's Dudleya at Rancho Santa Ana, or now what is known as California Botanic Gardens, mixed with heucheras as a very nice understory plant. So there's a bunch of oaks and they want to cover, creating a forest-like feeling. And so that's what they have achieved by putting some of these Dudleyas and some of these coral bells here. And you can see a closer of that. And here's another close-up of those Dudleyas and the coral bells. And the close-up too. And so it is so common to see them in what is known as the dry creeks. So with this water conservation, many landscape designers are creating dry creeks with rocks. And so a few areas will be covered with some of these Dudleys or some of these other succulents, just to give that water edge feeling for the public. And that's what we have here, mixed with our the native iris and the Dudley just coming out of rocks. Very nice usage of them. And so here's the flowers for that. And so here's the dry creek with the iris. Just an example, because you may see them in use or something like this in the landscape here in Long Beach. And there's the Dudleyas with the iris and the dry creek with the rocks, and just different views of that. Here's a cutesy fairy garden made completely out of different types of members of this family. So we have some that have been shaped into trees, and a few of the smaller ones that are just all over the ground, just to give that feeling of being gigantic. And the little tree was flowering, and here's the flowers for that. Here's one where they have taken one of those balls or moss balls, and they just completely cover it and then created a sphere that is living, and it's going to be covered with plants, and those will flower later on. An assortment of different succulents here, succulent displays, very popular, as well as some of them here and some of them there. And in some very nice, elegant container. Yes, the succulents can look very nice and can look very, very attractive. And so here's some that were done by a former student of mine, I think by the name of Margarita. And so here's those succulents display. A few raised beds with succulents right here, or on Naples Island. There's going to be certain neighbors that have planted a lot of succulents, as well as the living frames. So here is a circle or an oval that is completely covered with succulent, creating a living work of art. And so there's the close-up of those. A mini terrarium with succulents just gives you a different feeling right there, and with a kitty cat, or the living walls. And those have become very popular, and some members of this family are going to be the prime fillers of many of those walls, because it's just mimicking what they're going to be experiencing if they were happen to be in the wild. So there is a little bit of soil. They grow vertical. They are just hung from the wall, and voila, you have a nice living work of art, which is known as a living wall. And there's mixed with some other echeverias and ferns and agaves and a few other things. And here's a living frame or a living painting for a patio made up of hundreds of rosettes of the succulents. And the yellow stream that you see there, that is a sedum, a very tiny sedum or moss sedum as it is known. And there's the close-up of that. And on Wardlow and Atlantic, we have a child care area. And for many years, they had one of the best and the only actual living wall. This is a photograph when it was first installed. It no longer looks like this. It has greatly declined. The plants or the frames were grown by Armstrong Garden Centers. And so this is when they probably installed it, and it looked very, very nice. As time went by and the maintenance and the care had to follow, it did not. And so it started to degrade, and it's just has gone downhill since then. But when I was there and I took some photographs, it was very nice. This was not an inexpensive project. And so we have different types of sedum and different types of succulents growing out of cells. And here's ice plant creating some kind of rainbow. And so here's a close up of some of those. And you can see the individual segments. It was what happened to fall off. So I was able to photograph. So they do get irrigated with drip irrigation. The building has to be waterproof as well, because there is going to be water running or at least in contact with the walls. But you can see the different frames that are used. All of those were grown in a nursery, and then they were just assembled or placed in put in place, and that's what they created. How they created this living wall with a very artistic and very nice view. It no longer looks like this. So the Bixby Car Wash is right here. So it's right behind the Bixby Car Wash on Atlantic and Wardlow, if you happen to be around that area. And Dudleyas are also becoming popular. So a friend of mine who works at a Catalina Conservancy was doing a big movement towards having some of the neighbors in Avalon use dahlias and use the California and or the Catalina endemic plants for their landscape, as opposed to having to ship a couple of non-natives. And so he was showing them how to use some of the plants either in container, as you can see here, with the native plants, and including some Dudleya and the Euphorbia misera, and a few more here, including the Dudleya and the monkey flower. And there's the Dudleya, as well as living walls. So the Dahlias do lend themselves to being a very nice living wall. And there's a side view of that. Just around the neighborhood in downtown LA, Los Angeles, we have a nice garden with a few members of this plant family. And there's a different view of those individuals. And a couple of nurseries that have some very nice displays, or maybe foundation stock. So out of these plants that are growing in the ground, these nurseries can then go there and harvest a lot of the plant material for them to root out and sell it to the public. And that is exactly what's happening here. So Aeoniums planted in the ground, hundreds of possible plants that I can bring, I can produce from those. And here's where they have put them in containers, creating some kind of container with succulents, and or some nice colorful pots with succulents, or the succulent wreaths, as they are sometimes available or sold through the garden centers, or a succulent heart here made up of different succulent. So this is the nursery, very simple operation. Here are the rosettes that were harvested that morning, and those are going to then be either directly stick into this living wall for them, and then once they become established, they have rooted, now they can grow. And here are their flats that are going just rooting and a few roots, and they'll be ready to be shipped to the retailers for sale. And there's a few liners, flats liners with more succulents. And as they get older, they might grow them out a little bit more. So maybe in a 6-inch container, as you can see right here. And some of those are getting ready, almost there. Or here's a couple more, and or there's a few more right here, and just an assortment of different ones. And so with that, I thank you, and have a great day, and I'll see you in class. Take care.